I want to spend a little bit of time looking at data in Excel from GPSs, as well as different types of formats that we see it in. We've looked at ways of getting the data off a GPS or off our phone onto some mapping program so that we can work with it. So I wanted to do and illustrate a few other things and areas where you may run into trouble. So in this directory here, you can see that I've got my tracks or my waypoint files directly from in GPX mode. We've downloaded those off our GPS in DNR Garmin or Easy GPS. We also have some data that's in an Excel format. We have some data that's in a text file, and we have some data that's in what's called a CSV or comma separated value format. Now we generally use CSVs inside Excel, and that's why it shows up with the Excel icon. So first things we're going to do is we're going to look at the data as a text file. So there's a couple of ways that we can get our text file data into Excel, and one of the ways is we can just pull it in like that. What it'll do, it will pre-format the data into rows and columns based on the information. You can see here that our information at the top is in some weird formats, and in fact some of the fields aren't measured at all. So that's going to pose a problem. Once we get the data cleaned up here in Excel and exported out, bringing it into ArcGIS, the data needs to be in a very clean format. ArcGIS is very fussy on things, and so what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to increase or clean up our data. And the easiest way to clean this data up is we're just going to go and insert a row here. Now this information basically is all coming from here. So and you could do it however you want, whether it's copying, pasting, or whatever. But this first field here is going to be the HRMS. The second field is the VRMS, so that's B. C is going to be HDOP. D is going to be PDOP, and on it goes. So each one of these letters or words or comments here separated by the comma becomes that particular field. So we know that we start off here with HRMS. So you can either retype it or copy and paste it, HRMS. The next is VRMS, HDOP, etc. And so you're going to go ahead and you're going to fill in all these columns as you go along. So what I've done is I've gone ahead and I've renamed all these columns here based on the information that's in this field. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to delete these two fields right here because we're not allowed to have any empty rows or any empty columns prior to the first row of data. Now the other thing that's a little fussy is ArcGIS does not like to have spaces or funny characters. So we can get rid of the space or we can replace the space with an underscore. The underscore is basically the only character that you're allowed to use other than a number and other than a letter designation. That's not going to do it. The other thing that we're not allowed to do is we're not allowed to start a field name with a number. So we couldn't call this 1 underscore GLONASS. It would choke out or throw an error. So no spaces and no weird characters or field names don't start with with numbers. Now we get to something called lat north with some brackets. Again, the brackets aren't very useful, so we're going to have to replace or get rid of them. And our elevation is the ground elevation in code. So now that we've got this all cleaned up, we can go ahead and we can go File, Save As, and we can save it as an Excel spreadsheet. And we're going to record the number. So that's one way of getting data into an Excel spreadsheet. We'd just I just dragged it and dropped it in. The other way that we can do it is we can go through the file import process. So file open. We're going to find our text file. It's going to now run through a text import wizard where we have delimited values. My data has headers. And our data is going to be delimited by the comma. And so you can start to see how that's going to come across. Now we can set each of these values up as if it's a text or a number or something like that. I'll leave them for the defaults. And we can finish. Now what has happened is that it separated out the field names a little bit, but there's still some problems. There are still spaces, there are still weird characters, and in fact, these first two fields aren't named appropriately. So what we're going to have to do is delete those two columns. We're going to shift the data to the left, and now those should line up. VRMS, HDMS, and as we go along. Now it looks like I've deleted something because I know those are my codes. I know that's my height. So I must have unintentionally done something. That's what I did, is I got rid of the HRMS as I deleted that field. So this very first field is HRMS. Now we can delete this, bring them to the left, and away we go. We'll go through, we get rid of the spaces, the weird characters. We then go ahead and go File, Save As. We're going to save it as an Excel spreadsheet, and then we're all set. So I've opened up another Excel spreadsheet, and in this Excel spreadsheet, we've got some data. We have some X-coordinate data in latitude, longitude format, decimal degrees for those, and we also have some UTM values of GPS locations maybe in the field. So we'd like to maybe work with this again to bring it into ArcGIS, and how we're going to go about doing that. Again, one of the things that we're going to want to do is make sure that we have no weird characters or spaces in our field names. They don't start with numbers, things like that. Get that cleaned up, and then we can move on into the next process. Okay, so now I've opened up ArcGIS, and I've got a variety of different data layers here that we're going to look at. The very first thing we need to understand about ArcGIS, and you might have to go back to your cartography and intro GIS stuff, is to make sure that we understand what projections, coordinate systems are, and transformations. And just out of a sheer point of interest, I've got a number of provinces here, or the Manitoba province, in a variety of different coordinate systems. So here's Manitoba in NAD 83 zone 14N. Here it is in NAD 83 14N. Again, a little bit different of a coordinate projection, but nothing that you'd notice on the ground. And you can see that they line up in the same spots. And the third one that we have is the WGS 1984 UTM zone 14N. So the World Geographic System 1984. This is the native format that most GPSs operate in. And so you can see that all three of those locate to the same location. And it's not surprising, they're all UTM-based projections. Now, additionally, we have NAD WGS 84. And we can see that when we look at this, it's got a weird kind of shape to it. We've also got here something called a WGS84 Web Mercator. This is what a lot of web mapping programs are using, is this Web Mercator. And we also have NAD 27 GCS data as well. So you can see that each one of these has a different set of properties if we go to the properties information. So on our source tab, we see that this is a GCS 1984. If we look at one of the other ones, we'll see that this is a WGCS 1984 Zone 14N UTM. So all I did was I just projected this same data into different coordinate systems. Now, you may or may not experience this in ArcGIS, but if you zoom to the layer and we're now working with another layer of data, these two aren't in the same place. And in fact, if we go to the full extent, that we can see the one, but we don't know where that other one's at. This is a real quick indication that there's something not quite right with our data. If I do choose the NAD27 data, it's going to be weird as well. And if I choose the Web Mercator, it's in the same space, but there's still something wrong with it. It's not exactly the same. So the bottom line is, regardless of what our projection of our data is in, we need to be careful of the data projection as we're bringing data in and out of our GPS or different files. Now, you know that we've already done some of this kind of stuff. We've used perhaps the GPX to features tool. So remember that we've got data that we've pulled off our GPSs in GPX format using DNR Garmin or perhaps Easy GPS. We've saved them as a GPX file. We can now load them up this way. And the way that we load it in ArcGIS is we use the tool GPX to features. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to find that GPX file. And I'm going to open it up. It's going to ask me to save it to a location, so I'm going to make sure that I save it to where I can find it again, and I'm going to say OK. Now what's going to happen is it's going to bring it in the native format of that data set. We can still see that it's working here. So it's finished. We've got the green check mark that it brought it in, and it did bring in the data. It doesn't, however, show up on our NAD83 UTM map. And we can see that if we zoom to our extents, there's our NAD83 UTM map, but here's our data. Remember that our data came in decimal degree format. So now it's a matter of finding where is this data at and how can we get it to the right location. If we look at the properties of that particular data, we can see that it's come in using the native format. So in theory, we should be able to see it with this layer. And if we zoom to that layer, we now can see the dots on there. There they are. And so that's one way of looking at our information. We can see here that our layers, we don't have any, our units are unknown units, and our data frame and coordinate system are left blank for the time being. So that's one way of looking at our data. The other way that we can look at our data is that we can go to our ARC catalog. Remember that we save some of the data as a CSV file, as an Excel spreadsheet. Well, the Excel spreadsheet that we're working with, we're going to open that up. We're going to find the Excel points work tab that it was in, and we're going to drag and drop that over here into our window. Now, once it's come into our window, we've switched from our orders view into our source view here. And we can see that our table is here, and it looks very similar to what we had seen already. It's got all the information in it. Now, what we want to do with this is we want to be able to place those dots on a map. And the way we do that is we display our XY data. We choose our field that we're moving. We know that our X is X and our Y is Y. We have no Z field, no elevation, and we know that the data for this was a WGS-84, the native format of that. And so if we bring it in, it's brought it in as those points. I'm just going to expand those a little bit so we can see them. There they are. So that's brought it in and placed it on the WGS-84 map province. Now, I've done this with a number of things. I've brought it in as decimal degrees WGS-84. I've also brought it in with UTM with no coordinate system and UTM with a coordinate system as well. And so I'm just going to turn some of those on, and we don't see it here in our WGS-84 map, but we should see it now on our UTM map. Because I brought it in as UTMs, right click and display XY. Instead of doing X and Y, which were the lat long coordinates, we're going to go to easting and northings. Our coordinate system we know is going to be WGS-84 UTM 14N because that was the format and the place of the data collection, and it brought it in that way. So once that data has been brought in, we can see that that data is in that location. So we can bring it in with no coordinate system or with a coordinate system, and the data shows up in the right spot, as long as our province is in the right projection. So we can see all our UTM projections are going to have the right location for those, but this one won't because it's a different data set. So just a quick way of being careful about how you bring your data in to ArcGIS and what kind of data format you're using. So we've looked at bringing data in with a GPX file. We've looked at data bringing in with a CSV, with an Excel spreadsheet. And we can do the same thing with our CSV. I'm just going to drag and drop my CSV over here. It's going to look exactly the same as our Excel spreadsheet. It's got different information. And now you can see what has happened with our CSV is, for some reason, some of our data fields got mixed up. And so while it brought it in, this is a weird field name. So we might want to go back in and adjust that. Alternatively, we could also bring it in as a text file. So just open that one up, and we can see that the text file is the same. Regardless of whether it's brought in as a CSV or a text file, we can work with it in the same way. So we know that our UTM northings and eastings are in here as well. So if we wanted to display this data, we can go right-click, display XY data. Our X field is going to be our eastings. Our Y field is going to be our northings. Our coordinate system, once again, is going to be WGS-84. And we're going to bring it in that way. I will just turn off some of those other waypoints. What we just brought in was this MBFI 5B1 text. So let's zoom to that layer. And there's the information that we collected with our GPSs. And we're in the right coordinate location. WGS-84 zone 14N. So those are a number of different ways of bringing in the data. Directly as a GPX file using the GPX to features. We can bring it in as a spreadsheet. We can bring it as a text file or a CSV. We can right-click, display XY data, select our X and Y values, the projection that it was collected in, and then we need to make sure that we've got our data in the right projection that we're using our information on so that we get the correct locations.